Okay, I'm Susanna Müller-Santa from CEO Positions. I'm here with Achim Steiner, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Programme. And my first question to you is that you mentioned your children in your presentation, and you said they are 5 and 7 years old, right? And what kind of world would you like them to live in?
I think a world where they still have choices to make. I think that is one very important part, that our generation, already preceding generations, have, by virtue of what they did for themselves, preempted the choice of the next generation. And I think we are today at a point in time where, with almost 7 billion people on the planet, we are creating conditions where tomorrow's quality of life on the planet, opportunities to see, whether it is just beautiful spaces, national parks, wildlife, or indeed to live in a place with clean air. Many people in China today grow up without really seeing the blue sky. We have people growing up in industrialized nations for many years with heavy lead emissions, for example, in fuels. That's the kind of vision that I believe we need to bring far more to the forefront, because the next generation is not just about trying to clean up what happened before. They may not even have the option anymore, and that is a worrying part.
And how is this disruptive nature of change influencing what you just said? Because I heard you saying that is what really scares you.
You see, we live at a moment in time where we now understand far better what is happening to our planet and what the consequences of human activity are. We have always focused on the surface, in particularly economic terms, on growth of GDP. As long as our economies grow, our societies do well. What was hidden for so long was that underneath that very simple measurement of quality of life in societies was an environmental mining operation, degrading the fundamental life support systems. So here we are in the year 2008, richer than ever as a global economy, and yet faced with climate change that has the potential within this century to disrupt the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people, that can disrupt our economies because of the kinds of extreme weather events, be they droughts, be they floods, be they hurricanes. Remember, Katrina cost $80 billion, and just to give you a sense, that's roughly what we at the moment provide as development funding from northern countries to developing economies as a world community. One 24-hour extreme weather event. These kinds of disruptions are likely to cause economic chaos, but also social suffering and displacement of millions of people.
So is this a way to run the global economy as we do it right now?
I think we have many reasons to believe that we can run it much better, more efficient, more intelligently, and ultimately predicated on the principle that economic activity must be sustainable. It must reinvest in the productive capacity of our planet. To mine finite resources is one way to give yourself a boost, but if the consequence of that is that you are destroying fundamental life support systems, our atmosphere, just to mention another example, ozone and the ozone layer, then clearly we are heading in the wrong direction. Now, we have learned over the last decades that we can trigger innovation, technology development, market responses, but only if the public accepts how serious the challenge is and that we must pay a price for investing in sustainable production as opposed to mining the planet for another 2 or 3 generations.
And how about the decline in world GDP that is related to the way we act?
But you see, this is where you hit some of the limitations of our economic indices that we use today. If you take national accounts in the way that we measure gross national product, gross domestic product, an oil pollution incident is actually, in theory, a positive contribution to the economy, because it actually creates activity, employment, money spent on cleaning up, which contributes to economic growth. What we have not been able to capture is how much of our natural capital are we losing, and that is why for a long time now there is a debate in the world of economics: how do you change national accounts to introduce green accounting, where you, yes, capture the economic gains, but you also then deduct the drawdown on natural capital. And that is becoming much easier today because suddenly we realize that if we have to replace what nature provides us so-called as a free good right now, we can't afford it very often. Just take a simple example. Why should we worry about bees disappearing on the planet? You know, most of the time we're scared of them, we get stung by them. The fact of the matter is they are a vital part of the pollination services that nature provides for crops, for fruits, for essentially vegetation. If you were to try and replace bees with artificial pollination, I doubt agriculture could afford it. We certainly don't have the means to do it right now. That gives us an economic indicator for what the deduction from our economic success would be if bees disappeared, which they are at the moment in a mass die-out that we still cannot fully explain across the planet.
And you say that there is also a considerable waste of food. And coming back to your children, how do you train them or make them aware of the fact, or how do you try to educate them on food?
Well, I try not to make them feel like their father is the executive director of the UNEP environment program, because that probably will produce a counterintuitive reaction. But I think what is interesting is as I take them along with me sometimes to my office, or when they invited me to their school on World Environment Day, you know, children intuitively understand so quickly what you're talking about. I was stunned after just a brief half-hour visit to the school on World Environment Day how parents afterwards for a few weeks in Nairobi were telling me that I'd really put them in trouble because all their children were coming home now. I'm telling them, turn off the electricity, don't waste water. It doesn't take much intuitive understanding to know what we're talking about. So I believe our children are already so much more sensitized to what is happening, and I think also more predisposed to doing something about it. But, you know, in the end it can't just be down to the individual, because if my choice is, you know, to buy a product from one shop and it only costs 1/10 of what an environmentally sound product costs in another shop, then it's very difficult as an individual to change the global footprint of our economies. That's where, you know, governments and regulations are part of helping the marketplace to provide a different quality of product, which has been the central keynote of the discussion here this afternoon.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm thinking about companies like Nestle, for instance, who are also targeting children as a consumer group that is important to them. And I wonder how they would react or act proactively, perhaps.
Well, I think we've seen a number of debates right now, whether it is obesity, for example, where companies suddenly realize if they go on selling products as if nothing has changed, then ultimately they will lose their markets, they will lose their license to operate. That is why even companies in the fast food business are now part of an awareness building about, you know, less obesity, better quality of food. You see, you know, star cooks from television going into schools. It's interesting, you know, from being a sort of Michelin star driven culture, suddenly to be a popular TV cook, you actually go into schools and you talk to children about healthy food. Happening in England, it's happening in Germany, probably in Switzerland. I think this is where you can see how companies have to read the evolution of public sentiment. There comes a point when society suddenly says, for years you have been telling us not to worry, and we now know enough. And that's the point when people turn away from companies, from products. And a good company anticipates that and begins to reflect both knowledge and science, which is its ethical responsibility, but also changing market conditions, preferences, which is its commercial responsibility.
I really like that notion that companies have a new role in using the marketing machines that have considerably and proven effects on people's minds for that cause.
Yes, and I think you see a lot of co-branding today between a cause and a product. I mean, whether it is on children's issues, on health issues, indeed on climate issues now, you know, even biodiversity, national parks, funding conservation. There is an increasing tradition of leveraging off each other. The company from maybe a non-governmental organization or a scientific or a conservation organization, and these organizations back off a company's public audience, its advertising space. The danger is, however, that there is a fine line between helping each other to raise awareness and to greenwash and to, in a sense, lure people into believing that just because you support a tiger conservation project in Asia, you are therefore also changing the way you do your business. And I think this is where there is now a real challenge in the public debate. Let us take those adverts, these wonderful one-page adverts from oil companies and industrial companies, the big billboards, and let's engage them and say, okay, you say you want to be part of the solution. How are you doing it? Are you credible in terms of your own business, how you're moving forward? And what do you need from us as consumers? Because businesses also provide products to markets. It's up to us. And that responsibility to act, interact and engage is, I think, the key to making sure that we are not just having an advertising hooray.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.